Hello old-timers and newcomers, I am Core Scratches, and thank you for joining me to take another look at what I found. Halloween is almost upon us! I know I've said I'm terrible at observing holidays, but this year I have something special planned. Reviewing horror movies! Okay, so it's business as usual, but I do have several movies that are tangentially fitting for the holidays, so which ones of these many very definitely Halloween movies is first on the plate? The Tunnel. It takes place in October. What is your fear? To have the ground crumble from under you? Or the sky falling to bury you? The underground is a common fear. With the thousandfold places it holds in our culture, very few of them pleasant, and the natural inclination not to let ourselves be confined. It's where we bury our dead. It's where we hide our sin. It's where hell can be found. Footage. For most city dwellers, the underground is only a means to an end, the journey to and from their job. But for a small news crew, it was all the horror in the world. Up-and-coming reporter Natasha Warner finds a peculiar behaviour surrounding the underground waterways of Sydney from the city's politicians, where collectively they all stonewall anyone who questions how safe they are. In a misguided pursuit of respect and career advancement, she leads her crew down into the darkness, and a night of terror their words are barely enough to do justice. Which right there is a unique twist on the found footage formula. The characters survive. Or at least it was unique in 2011, I think. I really should take the time to dig into the whole history of found footage. That would be an interesting project, but it'd take way too long. And time's a wasting, so let's get to it. The Tunnel is a mockumentary spun around the footage recovered from the night of horror I mentioned, where the survivors are interviewed in time with the footage. To that end, it begins the way any good documentary should, a cinematic opening. October 21st, 2007, emergency responders in Sydney, Australia receives a desperate call from a woman in panic. Unsure of where she is, she wails into the operator's ear, screaming an incoherent babble where the only clear message is one of absolute terror, before the line cuts off. The coming catastrophe bookending the events to come, as the screen transitions to images of the Sydney railways, the sinking rainwater, and the tunnels where it all gathers. I kind of like the cinematic opening. I mean, yes, the credits make it abundantly clear that this is not something that actually happened. It lists the directors and the actors, and it actually calls it a film at several places. But this isn't your standard type of look at the footage I found in the woods and just roughly cut together type of found footage movie. This is supposed to be a mockumentary. And the cinematic opening, it makes sense given the context, and it does set the mood for the rest of the film.
My name is Natasha Warner, and I have worked in news and current affairs for well over 10 years.
Interspersed with her interview are news clips that unveil plans of the local government to recycle spill water using abandoned railway tunnels beneath Sydney. The suggestion was controversial due to the unverified number of Sydney's homeless that supposedly lived in the tunnels, but the government insisted there was no evidence to suggest that was true. Almost $100 million was poured into the project only for it to quietly vanish from public consciousness, and nothing coming of it.
It was like the whole thing never happened. That's when alarm bells went off in my head. Things just don't disappear.
Clearly you don't wear socks, lady. And this story doesn't revolve around Natasha, even if she might think so. There are other characters we need to introduce, such as Peter, played by Andy Rodoreda, and Jim Tangles-Williams, played by Luke Arnold. And this guy.
My name's Steve Miller. I'm a TV cameraman. I've been working in news and current affairs since the mid-80s.
Strangely, only Natasha and Steve feature in the documentary. I wonder why that is. Either way, as the documentary is trying to make sense of the pieces left behind, the movie has more footage to work with than what was recorded in the tunnels. I must praise the direction of the film. Carlo Ledesma, the director, understood how documentaries present real life as a narrative to tell a story, and created situations where a camera doesn't feel out of place and had the actors fill in the context through the interviews. Also, it lacks the kind of over-the-top dramatic editing you might see in other documentaries and just presents the situations as they were. I appreciate that. It makes the film less grinding than it could have been. Less believable, but less grinding. Steve and Tangles, they're tight like brothers, and Peter makes for one of the guys. But while they're all pleasant, it's clear Natasha is on the outskirts of the group. It's nothing unfamiliar, all of them are older, more experienced, and she measures herself by how well she does her job, and feels neglected when it's not acknowledged. Because she thinks being good or even the best will make people like her. Men are from Mars, women from Venus, that whole song and dance.
Just another, young person coming in, getting paid too much money, hadn't really proved herself, but, she was the next big thing.
I'm not saying the men aren't dicks, I'm just saying it's nothing new. This disparity between them, and by extension everyone around her, is what motivates her to make the decisions she does. The Reservoir story caught her attention, and digging into it reveals what could be a career maker for her. Asking about it through official channels has them stonewalled, but unofficially, the things people tell them paints a wholly different picture from the official proclamation.
And some rumours started to surface that not only were there homeless living in the tunnels, but there were homeless that were going missing.
Right. Question. What is strange about homeless people going missing? I mean, they live off the grid. According to this movie, they live in the sewers. They don't have easy access to food or clean water. And they are probably the most vulnerable group of people in society. Wouldn't it be stranger if they weren't going missing? I mean, it's still a tragedy, I'm just saying.
A week into their investigation, they come to meet with a man who claims to have lived in the tunnels. Trevor, played by James Catlin, who, despite being on screen for only 2 minutes, gives one of the more memorable performances of the film. In his rugged but gentle state, Trevor gives off an air of trustfulness that makes one immediately like him. He tells the crew how in the winters him and some of his friends would stay in the tunnels to keep warm. But as the interview moves towards him telling them about it, something changes. You can see the transition in his eyes. It's as if he leaves the room for a different place with every question they ask. What was it like down there? Does his friends still live down there? Did something happen? Did he see something?
No!
He screams like a child. He climbs the walls for a way out, and when he can't find one, he crumbles into pieces, unable to flee from a danger only he can see. It's rattling to see, but convinces Natasha beyond a shadow of a doubt. There is something down in the tunnels, and it's hurting people.
All the pieces of the puzzle were symptoms of something deeper. I just didn't know what. I needed more. We needed to get down there.
Natasha is a decent reporter, but has yet to break a major story. 10 years and her career is at a standstill, and may in fact be running its course. Thus, when she's unable to attain the permits to film in the tunnels, she tells their crew their boss will handle it and they're filming tonight. And the crew just accepts it. I mean, it's not their job to have functioning brain matter. They've been at this for some decades, they know how it works. October 19th, about 10:30. The crew is about to enter the underground when they're stopped by a security guard, played by Ben McLean. I don't know what his character name is, but let's just call him Kibbles. He is the worst kind of security guard. The honest kind. And when Natasha attempts to bribe him with Steve's money, he promptly escorts them out. But we wouldn't have a movie if people used common sense, so instead Natasha directs them to a chained-off side entrance.
I, at that point, was starting to feel as though there was something not quite right. I just filmed pretty much everything that was happening there. I thought we had to have some sort of way of protecting ourselves. I had some evidence that it wasn't me trying to push us down in there.
Listen, Mambo, If you're forced to break open chains to go into restricted areas, then no, you ain't got this all sorted. Can I honestly say this is all her fault at this point?
Looking back on that, that was probably a mistake.
You think?
Again, Ledesma's direction shined through a otherwise bone-thin chain of events. Steve and Tangles begin setting up more cinematic shots that don't really serve the story, aside from making it look slightly cooler. Knowing it's for a news segment, I wouldn't have questioned why they did that, but Steve takes the time to spell it out for the audience so it seems less jarring, and it'd only make sense for the documentary to use this footage since it was available. All these aspects of the situation allow Ledesma to make the footage look more interesting without breaking suspension of disbelief. It's very impressive. Leaving the utilidor for the subway tunnels allows the crew a new perspective on their everyday they've never considered before, which is just how massive the underground is. It's never occurred to them, but the railway tunnel spans some 50 feet in every direction or more before burrowing miles and miles beneath the surface. Bitter murals stain temple walls of concrete of the infrastructure complex, so vast it's like a whole new city laid out before them. However, unlike the living industrious steel and concrete Eden above them, these empty avenues and boulevards only exist as a thoroughfare, a necessary evil comfortably ignored by the pedestrians as they journey through the lifeless hollow. A dead burrow carved from the ground where the crew only journeys deeper. Through the public subway lines they make their way to the hidden tunnels the story revolves around, and Natasha tells their story. They began construction in the early 19th century, but were never finished due to World War II, when they were converted into bomb shelters. Since then they have been left idle and abandoned in the dock, with only occasional use by the Australian military for training purposes. There are still remnants of bygone eras scattered throughout the complex, with restrooms, instructions in the event of an attack, and even what appears to be domiciles the homeless have converted into shelters, only to quickly abandon, leaving behind all their possessions before scattering to the dock rather than staying in defiance of the hidden menace. I looked up what I could, and it seems as if at least half of all of it is true. These tunnels really do exist, they really do lie smack beneath the middle of Sydney, they really are full of historical refuse, and they do collect millions of liters of water. The tunnel is called St. James Lake, and it's a kilometer long and as much as 6 meters deep in places. However, I don't know how forgotten these tunnels are supposed to be. It's apparently possible to enter them for a bit of extreme tourism, or, as in this case, the purpose of making a movie. What I can tell you is the steel bell they find, which Natasha claims was installed as an air raid siren during World War II, is actually a prop that was used by performance artist Nigel Hellier in 1992. So, for a bit of dramatic effect, she strikes it! I know they don't know they're in a horror movie, but Christ! The sound is too much for Tangle's equipment to handle. The levels just peak this close to the source, so he asks Steve to keep an eye on the levels before leaving the room to record from further away. No one thinks much about it for a second, and without ceremony, Natasha strikes the bell again. The sound explodes through their bodies and out into the tunnel like the detonation of a cannon, and barely has the sound died down before Steve's brow furrows in confusion as he listens to the distant recording. Yo, Tangles! They move so fast they almost forget the camera to light the way, but when they reach the room, Tangles is already gone without a trace. Natasha quietly suspects they were pulling a prank, as they like to do, but after the fact she can only regret that mindset. She didn't hear what Steve heard. She didn't hear the noises. She didn't hear the shrill screaming or Tangle's panicked struggling. In their urgency they left the supplies, including extra flashlights and batteries, and gathering their thoughts they realized they must go back for them. But they're gone. Someone took them at the same time as they took Tangle's. Someone is stalking them down here. Someone is playing a game with them. Someone is herding them through the pitch-black tunnels. Someone killed Tangle so viciously his blood stained the walls and didn't leave a body.
Okay. No longer funny. Got it.
This movie is very emotionally driven and doesn't let the events speak for themselves, but give context through the interviews. Steve thought of himself a little bit like Tangle's older brother, and losing him, in addition to the pain, felt a little bit like he failed, as a brother and human being. Among the equipment was a night vision camera Natasha picked up in the hustle, and she had to put it down in order to help them open a door to the bloodstained room. When they leave the room, she notices it's still there, but not where she put it.
My instinct was to check it and see if it had recorded something.
Well, yeah. The sane, rational world you live in doesn't exist outside your peripheral. If you have a camera and you set it to record and then you leave the room, it's going to pick up something horrifying. That's how quantum mechanics work.
And what it recorded is horrifying. Someone or thing picked up the camera while they weren't looking and filmed them from behind their backs. Which I find more cheesy than unnerving, but I can see it being disturbing in the circumstance. But what's even more frightening is when it put the camera back, it accidentally revealed its identity.
And it was fucking frightening.
It's a blur!
With the horrible truth revealed, Peter has to unstick Steve's head from his ass and make him stay, and make him see that the best option is to stick together and make their way back to the surface. It won't do Tangles any good to run off and get all of them killed, and splitting up will only make them easier targets. Unwillingly, Steve accepts this and goes on to lead them with the light. But surprisingly, Natasha holds Peter back and tries to get him to stay and look for Tangles. It's difficult to word the emotions that go through Peter's head in that moment. Maybe it's because Natasha is the reason they're all down here. Maybe it's because she never fit in with the group. Maybe he's amused at her attempt to control the situation. Either way, he chuckles grimly, states that she's not here for Tangles, and walks away from her. Between staying in the cloying dock with whatever that thing is, and abandoning the story, Natasha follows the guys back towards the surface. Soon enough, they can hear the passing train so close the noise shakes the walls around them, and that's when they see him. Kibbles wanders out through the dock on his patrol, and they run up to him for help. They explain the situation, that something attacked them in the tunnels and that something took their friend. Where you might expect disbelief or frustration on Kibble's face, instead it only grows serious, and he leads them back towards the surface.
Give it a breath.
Tell us what's happening.
We're leaving.
Is he gonna help us? Go!
Remember Chekhov's gun. You establish a character, you have to use them, even if they're just kibbles. I mean, if you don't, it's like you're not following a very familiar dramatic structure, and that would make it seem realistic, and when has realism ever served a found footage movie?
Driven back by the creature's presence, the crew hurl themselves back down the tunnels from whence they came, until they find a hidden alcove to catch their breath, and pray to God that thing doesn't find them.
Do you see it?
No. But whatever it was fucking huge.
We promise it was really scary. It was like the Blair Witch.
When they feel they're ready to go, they leave, only to run into a fork in the road that isn't on the map. Tempting as it would have been to portray the tunnels as a labyrinth, it wouldn't make sense for the engineers to make the tunnels hard to navigate. Unlike other subterranean terror movies, at no point does the crew really get lost in the dock. They lose their way on occasion, but quickly finds it again, and with the tunnels being directly linked between easily identifiable landmarks, it's not a hard place to see through. Peter quickly determines what way to go, but on the off chance they get lost, the plan is to find the safest room they can and simply wait. Eventually their boss is going to notice they're gone and he will send for help. I mean, their boss knows they're there. Right?
No. Oh, fucking tell me John knows we're here.
I can only assume John wouldn't have let this happen if he knew Natasha couldn't get permits. But it's not explained very well why she didn't tell John. But because she didn't, not a person alive knows they're down here. She starts weeping about how much she needed the guys, only for Peter to throw it back in her face. One of their friends is dead because of her. No, she will not take responsibility for that. She couldn't have known this would happen. Besides, aren't they journalists? Weren't they looking for a story? Now they finally have an important one and they're just gonna throw it away? This drives Peter over the edge. He doesn't slap her, what he does is so much more insidious and satisfying. He takes the camera from her and forces her to step up. She wanna be a reporter? Then be a fucking reporter.
What's your piece to camera for this one, huh? Do you want to tell us how you lost a friend? Because your fucking stupidity?
Seeing her beaten the shit out of would have been fun, but seeing her humiliated, disgraced, blamed for Tangle's death and told in no uncertain terms she never was and never will be a real journalist and that she caused all of this for no reason is its own special delight.
It's fucking pathetic.
Having said their piece, they move on, and I am left wondering why Steve didn't raise his voice when he was the closest to Tangles, but they do turn off the camera, so maybe it happened off screen? Turning it on again for some reason. They do it just in time to catch a noise coming from the room they're about to pass. With the hope it somehow would be Tangles, they turn off the light and rely on the night vision just in case it's not. They find themselves at St. James Lake, and in the distance, something is floating. Someone is floating. It's the security guard from earlier, but his face has been mutilated. His eye sockets have been torn open and left to bleed into the water. Why would the creature do that, and then just leave him alone? It didn't. Eerily without a sound, a pale face slowly manifests from the darkness, towering above the helpless man. Gently, to not alert him, it embraces his head by the sides and coils its body around him, the way an octopus crushes its prey before it slowly twists and twists.
Goes to show Australia's got scary everything. Even chuds.
It's all a game to the creature, not a matter of food or defense, but a twisted pleasure in stalking down its prey, like a puppy chasing voles or a kid tearing the legs off insects. And it notices them. The growls echo with the intensity of a train piercing the tunnels as they run in blind panic away, until finally they find the light. Unthinking, only reacting, Natasha lets out a wail for anyone above to hear them. But there is no one to hear her. For reasons known only to the creature itself, it doesn't seem to follow them, but leaves them alone to take in their helplessness.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Don't worry about it. If you hadn't, we wouldn't have a movie.
I should probably mention as well, the creature is played by Goran D. Kloit, who is probably the biggest actor of this production. Even if you don't recognize him, you're probably familiar with him. In fact, he is unwittingly a lot of people's most depraved sexual fantasy. He plays several aliens in Covenant. They can't stay where they are. Sooner or later that thing will get bored of waiting, and it will come for them. It doesn't take long for it to attack, only to vanish again when Steve turns the camera and illuminates it, scaring it off.
And that was sort of dawned on me then that the light was our way of keeping it away from us.
It's also a very convenient way of making a creature frightening when you don't have a budget.
Yes, the creature is afraid of light. So what? They are still in its domain, and in no way out of danger. How long has it been since they last changed batteries? 3 hours? More? When they accidentally wander into what appears to be the creature's nest, covered in vines and soils and the stolen eyelids of its victims, the light begins to flicker. It's just the batteries burning out, they just need to replace them and it won't be an issue. But it's enough time for the creature to grow brave and charge at them, separating them and leaving us in the hands of Natasha as she runs through the dark. Thus begins one of the creepiest scenes I have seen in horror, ruined slightly by the for once less than stellar direction. What I mean is, it looks kind of like night vision video, but you look closely at the brighter areas, you'll see not only is the cone of light moving, but there is also a distinct bulb-like pattern to it. I think this scene was achieved by having the actress hold a flashlight and a camera in the same hand, and then the video went through post. I have no idea why Ledesma thought that was a good idea and why he didn't just use a real night vision camera, but it's what he went with. It's still a pretty creepy scene. For the longest moment, it seems as if Natasha had been left alone to quietly despair in the pitch-black corridor, wondering about every distant rumble, shrill wail and crackling gravel. But the creature isn't just cruel, it's smart. Its nest was lined with empty bottles that would clutter as they fell, and in the dark Natasha topples another one. Fast as the xenomorph in Alien Isolation, the creature emerges, only to slowly stalk about the room, seeming uncertain of where Natasha is, as if it can't see well enough in the dark as well. It lends Natasha the diminutive hope that she will escape, and she tries. This is how it should end. By traditional poetic justice, the most horrible death is reserved for the one responsible, but not today. The creature still demands the game, and drags Natasha's unconscious body back to the lake, where it throws her in to begin the hunt by tearing her eyeballs out. However, it never gets that far. In the time it took up to set up this game, Steve and Peter have come to, and arrive in the nick of time to chase the thing away and pull Natasha back to the shore. From there they know the way and they just run, but Peter stays behind to keep the creature busy, allowing Steve and Natasha to get ahead. However, not long after they find their way back to the subway tunnel, they look back to find Peter stumbling after them. His leg is crippled and he's utterly torn to shreds. All they need to do is get back to the station and they will all be safe. Except that isn't how this ends. Yes, they make it back to the station. Yes, they manage to call for help. But Peter dies all the same. Only Natasha and Steve survives to tell the story. Steve still works as a cameraman for Current Affairs. Natasha has resigned after everything that happened, and the investigation into the death of Peter Ferguson and the disappearance of Jim Tangles Williams was dropped due to what the police called conflicting evidence.
I feel responsible. I don't want to say that I felt like it was my fault.
What did you say?
I don't want to say that I felt like it was my fault.
Fuck you!
Back when I took an interest in found footage for the first time, The Tunnel was one of the few movies to really sit my ass down and make me pay attention. Since then, I have learned a thing or two, and it's no longer as impressive as it once was. With that in mind, I think it's a perfect film to introduce a friend or yourself to the genre if you've been avoiding it, or just felt overexposed to paranormal activity. Christ, there's another one coming! Never mind. The Tunnel perfects the basics of found footage while delivering a fairly by-the-numbers horror film that feels more unique than it is. Desperate to prove herself, an ambitious young journalist lures her friends and co-workers into restricted subterranean utilidors, only to be stalked down by a ravenous creature. Not only is it basic, I can think of several movies that have pretty much the same plot. Everything in the movie is borrowed from somewhere else, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but when it borrows from some of the most successful movies there are, any experienced horror fan would watch it with a sense of deja vu. I stand by it being a good film despite not being very original. I think representative is the best way to describe it, of found footage and horror in general. With so many pieces plucked and pillaged from other films, it does feel like watching those same movies again, and it can be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on the mindset you enter it with. That's a dangerous place for a movie to occupy, the intersection between tried and tested, so let's look at what the movie does with it. The found footage angle works very well, with an overall solid reason for filming as it starts out. With it being a mockumentary, the footage has been assembled after the fact, which makes the editing and pacing feel more natural than it otherwise would. They also give a reason for why they keep the cameras rolling, but it's a very poor reason, and I think entirely unnecessary. The way it comes across is when shit hits the fan, they keep the camera rolling without really thinking about it, when what they really need is the light. However, they turn the cameras off and on constantly with no clear reason given why, other than Carla Ledesma knowing something is about to happen. So it's a little bit contrived, but far less than other films I've seen. If you want me to nitpick, about 2/3 of the way in, I think Ledesma forgot it was supposed to be a mockumentary, as it's largely an unbroken stream of tunnel footage with neither Natasha or Steve commenting, despite there being a lot to comment on. But it doesn't bother me, and it doesn't detract from the experience. There's not much of a story aside from following the news crew as they try to survive. There's just enough to set up a series of events to thrill and unnerve the audience, which this film does very well. It's atmospheric, it's tense, and does a damn good job of feeling claustrophobic. The threat they're under is slowly built up with mystery and horror, and it's kept in the shadows enough to let one's imagination run wild, and then fed to us taste by taste until that final bite. Technically, the creatures were never fully revealed, but kept in the dark until the end despite them being on camera for long periods of time. Which is impressive, but also kind of a cockblock. The real horror of the film is the oppressive atmosphere and uncertainty about what waits in the dark with them. The Tunnel is an enjoyable film that takes the best aspects of other horror films and reuses them. It did so fairly well and created a tense survival experience that I would recommend anyone to pick up, whether you're new to horror or not. I sentence The Tunnel to an 8 on a scale of 11.
And there is a sequel coming. The Tunnel Dead End. But that's in the very early stages of development and won't be coming for a long time. I'm looking forward to it, but that's then, this is now, and I should be focusing on Halloween. I have as much as 3 weeks to capitalize on it, so I really should do something in spirit with the season, so... Spirit, Halloween... I'll go to America and visit Spirit Halloween. Now. Ooh! How about Ghosties and Bogies? Double feature.